Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Very excited to have everybody here today. We have a fantastic crowd, and we're going to be discussing the impact, that the coronavirus had on digital communication. That's the amazing thing about technology. So basically, we're going to be discussing, sorry, can you hear me, Leora?
Yeah, maybe you could mute yourself for a second and I will continue until you sort it out.
The intro.
So welcome everyone. We're very happy to have you on board of this Hyperchat, our third Hyperchat, and a very exciting one because we are going to be discussing public affairs, digital versus traditional. Has the coronavirus changed the way we are doing things in the Brussels bubble? And Phil, are you back with us without?
I'm back, and as with all things technological, we have amazing opportunities and challenges. And today we're going to be discussing how has coronavirus shifted things to the digital world? What does it mean for Brussels? What does it mean for institutions? What does it mean for companies? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Most people are looking forward to going back to the way things were, but is that even going to happen? So those are some of the questions we're going to be looking at today. And for that, we have an amazing crowd of people. We have panelists that are going to share their perspective from media. We have James Crisp from The Telegraph. We have Sophia Chrysopoulou from the Coca-Cola Company. And we have Pablo Perez, who was until recently in the EU institutions in charge of communication and social media. And we also have the most fabulous digital activation team from ZN, hello guys, who will be behind the scenes activating the conversation on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, where it has already started. So these are the faces behind the amazing tweets and the conversations that you will be seeing online. I encourage you, of course, to check all of this. And the person who will be making that connection between the online world and the offline and the conversation in this group is Leora, our hyper moderator. Leora, tell us more about what you're going to be focusing on.
Yes, that's right, Phil. So I will be the person who will be listening to you, our audience today. I want to be hearing from you. I want to make sure your questions are answered, your comments are heard. And if you have any questions or comments, please drop them into the chat. Just ignore the Q&A. I want all the comments in the chat and make sure you send them to all. Because if you send them to just a small group only, we will see them and it would be good for everyone to see them. So send all your comments and thoughts to all in the chat. So I'd like to start by just hearing who's on this group. So just write who you are, what company you work for, drop it in the chat. Also, of course, we'll be discussing this event on Twitter. The people you see now are going to turn all the amazing things that our speakers are saying into quoted images, other amazing content for social media. And so if you want to join the conversation on Twitter, then please use the hashtag Hyperchat and tag us so we can see that. So we would love for you to do that. So also, if you have any questions for the speakers, you can drop them into the chat and I'll make sure to address them to them after each speaker. So please join us in the chat starting now. Tell me who you are. Thank you.
Excellent. Now, I will invite our first panelist to share his thoughts on the topic. This is James Crisp. James has been a journalist for a decade and has been the Telegraph correspondent for Brussels. He's also very active on Twitter. He's one of the EU influencer that we recognize as having the most impact on the digital conversation in Brussels. So obviously he wears multiple hats and he'll be able to tell us how this is changing. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so I've had a few thoughts about this. I think I'm going to possibly go a little bit against the grain here. You know, I think it's fair to say that the coronavirus pandemic has accelerated a shift towards digital. We've certainly seen that in the newspaper industry. There's been a big uptick in the number of online subscriptions, which has softened the blow, although it is a considerable blow to the loss of traditional advertising during lockdown. But I think that something which was happening slower is now happening quicker. So is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think in a way it's kind of inevitable, but I mean, in the public affairs space and in the Brussels space, I'm not so convinced it is a good thing. I mean, look, I use Twitter a lot. I do use it a little bit for work. Sometimes I get stories off Twitter. Sometimes I might direct message someone, so it's a useful resource for contacts. WhatsApp I use far more often, as perhaps you'd expect, just to sort of check things, keep in touch with the office in London. You know, that's a very useful tool. But, you know, what I've missed is the face-to-face stuff, the feeling you can get from someone, the ability to charm, intimidate or beguile someone in a face-to-face scenario, which can be a useful tool for a journalist and I suspect also a lobbyist or a communications professional. I think one of my problems is that you look at Twitter, for example, and people, you know, I don't see Twitter really as work. I also don't see it, as I think some people do, as a replacement for political activism, for lobbying, for news, or for, in some sort of slightly sad cases, extended bouts of communal therapy. I'm constantly shocked by the amount of sharing that goes on Twitter. It's almost too much, I'd suggest. But, you know, whatever makes people happy. I think with the bubble, in a way, a shift to digital really reinforces all of the worst aspects of the bubble. You know, it strengthens those bad characteristics, the insularity, the echo chamber, the self-regard. All of that stuff is a lot easier to entrench if you don't actually have to go out and face reality. And I mean, I think we can agree that people will just listen and talk and hear from the people they agree with. A digital life as opposed to a face-to-face life. I mean, digital is in a way, it's PPE equipment for real life. You know, I think there are people who don't like social interaction, who don't want to have, certainly people in the institutions. I mean, Pablo may disagree, but I've met some of them. And, you know, they'd be much more comfortable behind a computer keyboard. People who prefer, for example, sending an email to picking up the phone. You know, if you want to contact me, pick up the phone. It shows guts. It also makes it impossible for me to escape. That's a very basic thing to do with communications. It's one of the reasons I call people. When you have someone in the phone, when you have someone face to face, even better, they can't ignore you. And it's harder for them to lie to you. Your body reacts in a way it doesn't want that to happen. So, you know, good things about the bubble. Brussels is a small village, right? So, you know, you could go out and meet people. You can have a coffee. You know, all of that stuff is great, and it's a resource which is sort of vanishingly rare. You know, a lot of my colleagues who stay in journalism and never get up off their desk. They're doing everything sort of online, and it's a real privilege actually to work in a place where it's like the first local paper I worked on, where you could go across the road and you'd see the court, you'd see the town hall, you'd see the clerk at the court. There's a real need for those sort of traditional foundation skills of being what I would consider a good journalist. I'll make the rest of this quick. Press conferences, they're rubbish now. Absolutely rubbish. Now, it's not the fault of the European Commission or any of the other institutions, but I don't think that they're particularly upset that, you know, you can turn off a journalist with a button, or that if you simply by dragging out the press conference for an hour and a half, you bore the press pack into submission. You know, I miss, even though the midday press conferences can sometimes drag, you know, at least you can see people, at least you can get a feel for rooms. Summits, I mean, you know, the amount of sitting around in summits, what do you do during that time? You're looking to see people who you know, diplomats who you know, who you can pump for information, who you can discuss and chat and joke with and gossip with, and do those sort of things and trade little bits of info which help you to understand what's going on in that room where the EU leaders are locked away. And also, frankly, it helps stave off the boredom of sitting in a giant room for 8 hours waiting for something to happen. So I don't like lockdown, basically. I think it's rubbish. And I think that it would provide an excuse for people to say, oh, well, we've done it this way now, because they're people who lack confidence and don't want to actually meet people face to face anyway, because, they're, emotionally weak.
Thank you, James. That was a great way to kickstart the conversation. Hopefully people will be reacting to this in the platform. So basically what's very clear is you've said you don't like the lockdown and the kind of lack of face-to-face. And I think what you're saying is probably going to be echoed either, out loud or behind closed doors by a lot of people in Brussels, because there's an urge to go back to the way things were. Now, I think the real question here is, do people have a choice? Do you think it is going to, even if you prefer it to be that way, will there be the option, or will the acceleration towards digital continue? And I think you're right to say that it probably, creates, it'll favor different kinds of skills than the ones that work in a discussion with lots of people.
It'll favor worse skills, Philip. It'll favor skills which are sort of held by people who don't have social skills.
Possibly, but the question is, do you think this trend will reverse itself or will continue to increase, whether you like it or not?
Well, I think the problem is there's an ongoing sanitization of society in general. People don't want to get sort of down and dirty in any sort of real sense. It may be, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example which doesn't revolve around drinking. But I've been indoors for a long time and haven't been to a pub for a long time because of my young children. So really, I find myself thinking about going to the pub almost constantly, even more than I did before lockdown, which was quite a lot. So, I mean, people feel more comfortable with something anodyne, bland, sanitized, inoffensive. And you get that more. It's suddenly a safer existence if you're behind your PPE of your digital avatar. And also it's an excuse for people to be work shy. You can simply turn off your screen, you can put on mute, and you can pretend to be listening to whatever your boss is whittering on about for hours and hours and hours in another pointless meeting. And you can do something, useful like shopping or, I can't think of anything more useful than food shopping at the moment. So, yeah.
So I think this will be an excellent cue to the first question that we're going to ask the audience. So Leora, tell us what we're going to be talking about, and let's discuss what's happening on the internet.
Yeah, I wanted to share that we have a lot of different people from lots of different places joining us on the chat. And by the way, I should have said that you should share it with all panelists and attendees. I wasn't specific enough. So I have received a lot of comments that not everyone has seen. So from now on, please share your comments with all panelists and attendees for everyone to see. And we have we have professors, industry, students, associations, communication professionals with us. And we look forward to hearing all your comments. So thank you very much for sharing who you are. Yes, and before we go into those comments, I would like to share a poll with you to get a bit of the feel of the crowd. Are you with James, who says, well, if you like social media, you're just emotionally weak, or do you feel otherwise and you feel it's more modern and more interesting and a better way to reach your target audience? This is what we're polling right now. So I'm going to open the first poll, and I'm going to do that right now for you to be able to vote. By the way, we have already done this on Twitter a couple of days ago, so we have some results already, and we can show you this while you are voting. And Phil, maybe you can go to the next page. On Twitter, it was quite clear that our audience was not so interested in cigars and fancy dinners, unlike James. They said, yes, a digital campaign, that is the way to go. But we're curious to see where you're going. Well, if I look at the results until now, we are also heading towards a digital campaign. So of course we are in agreement, although we are neutral during this hyper chat, aren't we, Phil? So I'm gonna, I see yourself voting. So I just want to give it a few more seconds, and then I'm gonna end the poll so we can see the results. And then I'd really like James to comment on this, although I have a feeling what he's going to say. But it's interesting, and maybe it can also be a little bit of both. So we have still people voting, but I'm going to end it, although, or else it might be a little bit boring. So I'm going to end the poll, and then I'm going to share the results with you. And we'll see that 74% says the best and most cost-effective way to reach policymakers around your issues is a digital campaign. And 26% says, no, I'm going for big cigars and expensive dinners. What do you have to say about this, James?
Well, I think that reflects very poorly on policymakers. I mean, I want people who are forming policy to reflect my values and the things I enjoy. And I enjoy, well, I'm less bothered about big cigars, but I certainly enjoy expensive dinners. And I mean, you know, do you want to be represented by someone who is a kind of arch technocrat, some sort of joyless, bloodless quasi-robot, or do you want someone who you would like to go for a pint with every now and again and has some sort of humanity and some red blood coursing through their veins? I mean, you know, I think you need to have someone who's a little bit less risk averse in those sort of areas. I mean, the thing I'd sort of point out is that, you know, there's obviously a place for social media, but I think certainly in things like Brexit, people have mistaken going on Twitter and moaning or complaining for political activism, when in fact, you know, if you really want to care about something, why don't you go outside and stand in front of the Houses of Parliament, maybe burn a few tires, do something constructive.
Okay.
Right. Sorry, Phil, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I wanted to link it to our next speaker. I don't know if you have some other points from Twitter.
Yes, I have a person who I would like to bring in to ask a question, in fact. And I also have a comment from Catherine Sturmer, who said, shouldn't the argument count? Then it doesn't matter if it's digital or face-to-face, which I thought was a good comment. But I'd like to, I have a person from the audience who is very eager to ask a question. So I thought that we should do this. It's a question for James. And this is, we're ready to bring this person in now, and this is Florence Ranson, and she knows everything about this field, so I'm very curious to hear what she has to ask James. Florence, are you there, and can we see you?
I'm here.
Yes, I can hear you. Now
yeah, okay, good. You should be able to see me as well. I don't know why you don't, but okay, there we go. There we are. Hi, thanks, Laura. Hi, James. Good to see you. And you still haven't been to the hairdressers. So if people who follow James on Twitter, he was complaining about not being able to go to the hairdressers recently.
The hairdressers are very masked for that amount of time. Sorry.
But this is to me typically actually in link with what you were saying, because first of all, maybe not so much of a question as a comment. I think it's a bit too black and white to say that because you're on social media, you have a social problem. It's true what Phil said, like we don't have a choice for the moment. So, but my feeling would be that while I fully understand that for journalists, it makes things more difficult, because I fully agree that seeing people perceiving their reaction and establishing an eye-to-eye contact in terms of lobbying and public affairs strategy. A lot of the people I have spoken to when it comes to, for instance, events, find that it has given their events a new boost to be able to hold these events online, because instead of having about 100 people and preaching to the usual crowds in Brussels, so 100 people physically attending a meeting, they actually are able to bring in speakers from abroad. I mean, many trade associations wouldn't necessarily be able to pay for like 2 or 3 plane tickets to bring in certain speakers and so on, but they have them online. They reach out to many more people in countries where they would not necessarily have been talked about, or where they would not necessarily have reached an audience. So, you know, at least I would say that certainly in terms of public affairs, when it comes to, and communications, when it comes to disseminating the message of sectors, corporates, or trade associations, I think it's actually made a positive difference. And that's why I personally think that for bigger events, and that doesn't prevent people from going back to smaller face-to-face meetings, because I agree these are, we cannot avoid them, and I don't think anybody wants to avoid them. But in terms of broader audiences, I think it has made a difference. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for what you've just said, and I can understand certainly your argument. I don't think it reflects very well on Brussels as a, you know, which is very much an events town, but it's taken a pandemic to introduce something which is, you know, as innovative as Skype, which has been around for quite a long time. I think that shows how unwilling people are in this town to take risks for the fear of sort of falling flat on their face. And I'm going to sort of praise one of our speakers, Pablo. You know, Pablo, in an odd way, he goes against everything I've sort of said, in that I feel like I have a relationship with him, even though we've never met and we've only ever talked on Twitter. But when he was at the commission, you know, he did take risks, and that gave his tweets a sort of an added authenticity, bite, and fun, which are lacking in many other sort of institutional tweets or trade associations tweets. So I think what I'm trying to say is, why does it take a pandemic to set up a webcam? You know, I think that shows a lack of imagination, but I can certainly see how for events it would be a good thing.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that question, Florence. And James, thank you for your thought-provoking, delightful comments. I think that at least got everybody thinking. We can see in the comments people saying, I love expensive dinners and chat with policymakers over several glasses of champagne. Now, I think the key thing to look at is, you know, how the underlying trends are transforming the conversation that we're looking at. Last week, there was another discussion on the impact of digital, and the speakers were focusing on how the parliament was actually getting higher participation in certain debates and voting, and how more people from different countries were actually now engaging. So the fact that you're in a geographic space means that you can now think, okay, it's not just Brussels, you don't have to be here, you don't have to know everybody here, but you're forced to look at this broader space. So I think interesting things are happening, and it's changing the way we're thinking about communication and approaching things. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's going to bring a different perspective. And this is Sophia, who is with Coca-Cola. Sophia actually has a background in communication. She was at the parliament before, and then in the corporate world. And of course, Coca-Cola has been in the news for taking a very strong and interesting position on advertising on Facebook. So Sophia, how do you think things are changing, and where do you think things are heading? Yeah.
Let me unmute. Hello, everyone, and I enjoyed very much the discussion with James just now, I have to say. I recognize many comments I've made to myself the past few months. Now, I think that digital public affairs were destined to be part of our work even before COVID, even without COVID. And we now need to give it the attention that it deserves. To the question, digital or traditional, I think the answers are, first, is a mix. You need both. And it depends absolutely when, what types of goals you have. What are your business objectives? What are the objectives of your organization or your campaign or your team? Because in our team, our objective is to be credible interlocutors for the policymakers, for the journalists, for the stakeholders, and to demonstrate thought leadership. So that on that part also, it's what the digital environment is helpful. During COVID, I have to say, it felt at the beginning like fixing a plane while flying, and you needed all the innovative thinking you can get. And then this is where you look, and it's also relevant to what you commented before, Philip. It's, you need to go back to the one compass, which is the purpose of your organization, and then everything you do, either digital or traditionally, it will be more authentic and more impactful. Of course, when it is about, because you asked me to talk about if it is easy or not to reach the policymakers, I think this is the time where you need to be genuinely helpful. We've seen at the beginning of the crisis, and we're still in it, I'm not saying that we are through it, that you see an increased level of dialogue between administrations and businesses, because administrations and the EU institutions had to take decisions very quickly with very little data. So our role was to bring forward the evidence from the field, if you like, and to help them make a decision. So we may not have the live contact we once had, we may not share the same office, right? But we have a very strong sense of urgency to manage the crisis and also map the blueprint for recovery. We use the digital sphere to communicate with our consumers, with our associates, but also to talk about the decisions we make, as you just said, to talk about the actions we take, but also how we work with the communities in Europe and beyond. And I think there you can fall very easily in the trap of just broadcasting, because there you don't have immediate reaction from the person who necessarily who reads your tweet, right? So it's very easy to just broadcast, but it's more, public affairs is about engagement, digital or traditional. And having thorough conversations on policies on social media is rare and is difficult to do. And as a company, yes, of course, as a team here in Brussels, we are rethinking advocacy for a more hybrid situation, I would say, where you have digital mainly, but you have a little bit of real meetings. And it's not, undeniably, is not the same, because this is the time when the governments and the EU institutions will really transform the way we operate for our personal lives, but also the business environment. And it's one thing to activate your network, the existing network that you have in these times of the lockdown, of difficult live contacts. And it's another thing to create a new network for the new issues that arise. And this is where I would, and also create the new network, but also to what James said before, it's about trust. How will this new audience trust you? How will they understand what you're doing? And I think the digital space has a lot to prove there in how sustainable this is. I like webinars, but I have to say, many times I feel that it's very, sterile is the English word. I find it, I like the charm of the online meetings with policymakers. You don't have this theatrical distance of big offices. It feels more equal, but at the same time, I don't think, they can only substitute the real contact. I don't think that it can replace it. And for me, it's about both. And I've been in politics as well, and I've seen politicians treating the likes as votes. And we shouldn't fall in the trap to treat the likes on our Twitter or on any other channel as that of approval of what we are saying. But I've done digital campaigns. We've used it for the Water Framework Directive to retain the legislation as is. We've worked on the 100 years of Coca-Cola production in Europe, which was an amazing experience. And it created more opportunities for us to engage bilaterally. So there I saw that it can work, but I'm looking also forward to the new tools and new ideas and how we can bring it to the next level. Phil, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I think it's very interesting. I want to just jump in first because we've got a couple of questions from the people in the Zoom, and basically when we talk about networking, it's very interesting that of course you can't do the same physical networking that you have, but you can do a lot of online connection, like James mentioned with Pablos, and the idea that you can actually get a pretty good idea of who the person is. So what I would recommend you do is drop your LinkedIn info in the chat if you want to meet up with the other people who are in this conversation. Somebody was asking Sophia about your Twitter account, so it's been dropped in the comments. So basically, there's a lot of interaction that happens online, and I think it's important to understand that that's just part of a broader system. And basically, it'll take a place in it in the same way, newsprint journalism makes people who can write really well come forward. TV is better for people who are able to have a strong presence on, a visual presence. So these are simply different ways to come across. None of them is perfect. None of them is right. I want to come back to you, Sophia, because I think, I think the underlying trend, which nobody's really challenged, is the move towards more intense digital conversations. And that creates the possibility of more transparent conversations, because you, instead of being behind closed doors, you can decide to say, you know what, we're going to tell people what we're doing, what we believe in. We're also having more human conversations, because a lot of the time it's not a faceless press release, it's a tweet from a team person like yourself. So do you think that the trend is going to continue? What kind of space do you think is going to continue? And is it going to transform the nature of the conversation and also the emotional content, as we've seen with Coca-Cola taking a strong position on advertising itself? So what do you see as the big shifts right now?
I think that what I see happening already is that digital is inevitable, as James said before, and it will not stop even if tomorrow there was no COVID. So I think this will continue. I think we need to use it smartly, in the sense that I see digital working very well to bring down some prejudice. Oh, you're working on that. Oh, I didn't know that you were doing X. So it helps reach a wider audience. But then I really want to have the reaction and really want to have the feedback, look in the eyes in a way, and have the immediate feeling of whether this clicked or not, whether this has moved the needle or not. So I don't see it going down when the lockdown is over, but I think both intensifying and then bringing some nuances and making it a more organic part of your outreach and your advocacy. Now, of course, business need to take, and business like Coca-Cola are in a position to make a difference. And when they have this position, they have this duty to act. You talked about advertising, yet I think it was also a means to bring forward a message when you are with this act, which is, just to be clear, is not a boycott, is a pause for 30 days at least, so we can review our policies and also see what our partners can do and improve in terms of accountability and transparency. hate doesn't have a place in the world and doesn't have a place on social media. And this is something, it's an example that of the citizenship that you have in this society. And yes, this time is expressed via the advertising world, but the mere fact that this is used as a pressure, it's also sending a message that it is important, right? Because I think that that's very important. A company that it is consumer-facing company needs to operate in an environment that it is safe for and it is appropriate for its consumers. So we cannot be in a place where our consumers cannot enjoy that if it doesn't have certain standards. So to your question, all this intensifies. Everything has intensified via digital, but I still feel the value of the face-to-face contact.
Thank you.
If I answered your questions, right?
Absolutely. And the conversation continues, but it continues online and it continues in the chat. A lot of people sharing their LinkedIn profile. So Leora, what's happening on Twitter, social media, and polls?
Yes, well, a lot of people are saying, well, it's a real mix. Of course, you need social media, but you also need some real life-to-life, real-life contact. And of course, that's true. But after you have that, that meeting with an MEP or with a commissioner, what is the first thing they do? It's they pull up their phone, and just like the rest of us. And if your messages come out there, then you have a good chance of them sinking in, because it's that repetition that matters. And that's where a strong digital campaign matters. And that's what a lot of people on the chat are saying, as well as sharing their LinkedIn contacts in hope of real long-term connection. So that is great what's happening on the chat. What I would like to do is bring in another person to ask a question. There's a question for Sophia. It's Francesco Florendi from BBMRI ERIC. That's the biobanks. I just want to see if Francesco is with us.
Yes, here I am.
And he is there. Hello, Francesco. How are you?
Hello. Very well. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for bringing me in. I actually have two questions linked to what Sophia was just mentioning. And one is a very practical one from fellow public affairs people to fellow public affairs people. When we, regardless of the size of the company, mine is a rather small one compared to Coca-Cola, but we still have to make trade-offs between the money, the time we put into in-person Brussels-based stuff versus media campaign. So I think it's a very complicated balance to find, and I'm curious to maybe not to ask you exactly, Sophia, what's the balance you found in Coca-Cola. It'd be great if you can answer that. But what would be really the criteria that you're looking at into defining the specific balance that obviously from the chat comes out as the, we all agree that there is a balance of it, but how do you calculate this? And the second question I have is, and it's really close to me, it's transparency and accountability. I used to work for a patient organization. I still work a lot, very closely with patients. And for them, let's say the in-person and strong emotional content, it's a given. It's something they really don't have to work on. It's very obvious in the type of communication they do, be it in person, be it in social media. For companies, organizations, it's a bit difficult, and when it's done face-to-face, that type of public affairs work, it's much easier, but it becomes much less accountable, much less transparent. I like one of the things that I like from the pandemic, very few things, is that a lot of this communication is moving online, and it's much more transparent, much more easy to track, not only for the policymakers themselves, but also for fellow organizations. And I'm finding organizations that actually, with which I share a lot of values, that finally are bringing these conversations out from the offices into the public sphere, and new collaborations are coming up that before were not happening. Do you have the same feeling? Do you like this more, let's say, increased accountability? And can we bring this in real life once the pandemic is over? But these are my two questions.
Great, Francesco. Thank you very much for the questions, and nice to meet you. Now, on the first point, the first question, practical about the criteria. I think first you need to ruthlessly prioritize. It doesn't mean that because a big company can do everything and be on every front at every moment. So you ruthlessly prioritize. Then you look at who is your audience. If your audience is not really online and is a senior commission official, or you really need to see where you who is going to listen to what you are saying. And then I think you need both. I don't think now you can easily afford and say, I'm going to only work on that, and I'm going to box that only for media. This is when you want to, as we said before, to move the needle, you need to work on both levels. And then the balance, I think it depends also, another thing, is also it depends on the timeline of the debate. Are you at the part of the debate where it is open for, when you still set the scope of the discussion, or are you part of the debate where it is imminent, about to be voted or anything? So I think that's also another criteria. But I think that online media helps people understand where you stand as a company, what you are for, and this needs to be easy for everyone. This needs to be easy for everyone who is interested in this topic to know what you stand for. On the transparency, of course, we need, I didn't touch it maybe because I thought it was self-evident that there are rules that they should always be respected. Either we are offline or online. I don't follow different rules when I speak with somebody on a Zoom, and different rules when I speak in live on a meeting. And the company, and I think every company, at least the one I work for, but I expect that all the companies have a code of conduct and make sure that their staff understands the rules of engaging with policymakers and stakeholders. It is not without rules. It is and it has to be done with transparency and accountability. I equally feel accountable in whichever meeting I do, or if I join a wide audience or a networking cocktail back in the days. So this doesn't change my approach on that. If you feel that this has brought more accountability, I think this is a good thing, and I'm very confident that this is something we will all seek more on the in the future, even after the lockdown.
Thank
so
you.
It's about principles and keeping them everywhere.
It's very interesting. We had a couple of questions on transparency. And before passing it back to you, Leora, I think it's, I think the thing about transparency is that it can make things more transparent. It doesn't inevitably make it more transparent, because of course you can hide things, you can fake things and all that on digital. But I think if you decide that your strategy is to be very transparent, you can start sharing a lot more information on a regular basis. So you have to make that decision and you have to mean it, but I think it's possible, but not inevitable. Leora, you wanted to share some things on Twitter?
Yes, I wanted to share that in the meantime, we are, the team is sharing everything that we are doing live on Twitter. And I just wanted to share that with you so that you can see it, and also share that with you on your own Twitter profile. So everything that, or a lot of interest of the provoking things that James has said are already live on our Twitter channel. The same for the quotes, for Sophia's quotes, as well as the results of our poll. And now the things that you have said. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can't see your browser. I think
you cannot?
No, we're on the, you must be on the other screen, so.
Oh, okay.
You see, you said that it wasn't rough and ready, but despite this, you can have very authentic experiences on Zoom. And I hope you get to see that, this is not pre-recorded, it's live. And we're also, and I think, by the way,
How about now?
No, it's perfect.
So I was just showing this the beautiful tweets about James and about Sophia, about the polls. We added some GIFs. And so, and there are people discussing this already. So people are saying, what about press conferences being rubbish now? They were rubbish all the time. This is Mark, who's also with us, by the way, and making interesting comments on in the chat right now. You can check them out. So very interesting conversations. I also wanted to share with you, and tell me if you can't see it, the conversation we've been having over the past couple of days on LinkedIn. I will drop the link on the chat in a second. Very interesting conversation around this question: has COVID-19 permanently shifted Brussels bubble communication MPA towards digital? Or are we going back like James wants us to? There are many different points of view that are being shared. So you can definitely add to that the thoughts that we are sharing today and continue the conversation on Twitter. So I just wanted to share that so that you can see it. I will not stop sharing. Yeah, that is all from my side for the moment.
Thank you very much, Leora. And I think, you know, for those of you, and we have a really good crowd, over 100 we've had it during this conversation. You know, people are saying a lot of this is kind of cleaned up and doesn't feel very authentic. I think you can see, and obviously we're working very hard on trying to add interaction, conversation. You know, absolutely hate those webinars where you have like a giant screen with a slide and it goes on for half an hour and somebody presents. I think you need to bring in conversation. You need to do different things to try to break the flow and to basically allow people to engage, which is what we're doing. And I hope that, you know, the audience is feeling at least involved. We're checking the comments and basically, I think there is a way to make this interaction pretty real, pretty authentic. I think people get a sense of who they are. And, you know, this is one interesting part of the live component of this, because basically when you're live, you screw up. When you screw up, you kind of get to know people a little bit better. So I think that's, you know, that's why we deliberately inject these little moments of authenticity. Now, I'd like to come to our third speaker today, Pablo Perez, who's actually been both a journalist and he then worked in the commission, and he was at digital communication and then headed social media. And I think he's done a lot of interesting work. And, you know, I think the really interesting thing that James, the advocate for cigars and lobbying, was still recognizing that, yeah, you can get to know people even though you haven't met them face to face. I think you can have a fairly intimate connection with people on social media that can sometimes be deeper than when you just had a chat and a drink at an event. So I do think it's pretty fluid, it's pretty complex. So Pablo, I would like to give you the floor after this little acknowledgement.
Beautiful, son.
Over to you.
Why didn't you stand up, Pablo?
I should, I know. I mean, it's because of, yeah, I'm not really wearing a proper pants, let's say it like that. So, but anyway, it's kind of trending in the Brussels bubble lately to do not wear, you know, a proper kind of suit. But anyway, you know, what James was saying before, and you just mentioned it, this relationship that you can actually build up. It is true that it's possible. I mean, actually, and James was mentioning it before. We never met in person. Probably we have seen each other, but we have had, of course, our conversation via Twitter, and I appreciate him a lot. I mean, I have a lot of fun on Twitter, and I really like this, you know, straightforward way of presenting the information indeed. But you know, going to the topic, and it has been mentioned already, but what this pandemic is going to do, in my opinion, is to exactly speed up the process of moving, let's say, forward in digital communication, but towards a mix. I totally agree with this statement that this has to be a mix. It has to be the best of all, but it has to be a fair mix. Okay, traditional communication still has more resources, human and financial, a greater, let's say, hierarchical importance, even more professional respect. We have, even if we have seen, you know, during this crisis, how underestimate digital communication have had consequences in terms of trust and in terms of impact. But beyond that, it could be also naive to think that this crisis is going to change everything. but not digital communication. No, digital communication, we can still go on. No, it has to change. Everyone needs to adapt. It has to adapt not only for the traditional things that we can no longer do during this period in the same way, but the ways and rules conceived for normality, or how we use social media before, are no longer valid. People need interaction, and transparency is kind of moving back to the roots of what social media was about at the really beginning. And political actors need to show what they do, not just statements and slogans. I think that something that this pandemic has shown is that people are a little bit fed up with the slogans. So before, the political actors just, were used to adapt their messages for digital, to prioritize traditional communication. It's okay. Now they need to adapt themselves and their overall communication strategy. It's a change of mentality, okay? And for that, you need to be real. And I agree that you cannot continue in the way that you go there, put your slogan out there, your statement, whatever, and you don't care anymore. I understand that from a traditional way of seeing politics, from the politics side, this is kind of it might be perceived as a good thing, because no one is going to challenge you as a politician if you just put your statement out there and that's it, goodbye, I don't care anymore. In these times of crisis, for me, it is clear that there are three pillars that people need to actually go through on social media, that is, or online digital communication, is transparency from the political point of view. Transparency, making yourself available all the time, actually, to the journalists, and then send out direct factual messages. No slogan, no war declaration, please. This is not a war. We don't need slogan and speeches to remember. We need solution. And if you don't have solutions, actions. Which actions are you taking? And not telling, again, showing it and fast. And digital is probably, in my opinion, one of the best way to do so. But again, it implies a change of mentality. It implies some kind of truth from the political figures. Not just the statement that we can all think about. So, and beyond that, I must say that if you defend, as I believe we all defend freedom and the right to information, you cannot be against traditional or neither against digital. You need to defend them. You need to make them better, to make them more open, and to create that mix with the people in mind. Basically, is adapt, bring the traditional ways on board, and renew the exchange of information with the public and with the media. And James and others have been mentioning also, I have seen on Twitter that well, press conferences are boring. Yes, I mean, but not just press conferences, also the institutions. And most of the time it's okay. But the truth is that for years, it existed the possibility of actually, as James was saying, putting a camera. I mean, we are, the commission, sorry, is already putting a live every single press conference. Okay, make it available not only to ask questions, not only to the journalists that are in the room, open it, because maybe they cannot go, maybe they have an interview with other people. But for me, the most important, and what this pandemic has shown us, is that the politicians, the leaders, that we have had some problem with leadership, especially during the first month of the pandemics in the European Union, need to make themselves available. I have missed a press conference from the political leadership with no time frame. And I know the Commission is one of the only institutions in the world that have a press conference every day, and they have maintained the press conference during these difficult times. But I'm talking about the leadership, the political leadership, the Commission using their commissioners to actually spread out the messages, to talk with the journalists, not with one journalist, no, in a press conference live, receive the question. Be brave, to actually answer directly to the concerns of the public and to the question of the journalist. And leaving that aside, I believe also that it has been mentioned already also in the LinkedIn conversation, that is, I invite everyone actually to go on LinkedIn on your account and take a look and participate, because it's quite interesting. I believe that the institutions or most people of the institution are going to try to go back to the way things used to be. And there is a part that is important, and it's not the same to face to face. Maybe it's because I'm coming from the south of Europe, but it's not the same. It is a person-to-person conversation. You can actually get a feeling if the person in front of you is lying to you, is putting some pressure, is trying to trick you, is trying to like just divert the conversation, and if they want or do not want to talk about certain topics. And also there are certain a conversation that actually need, in my opinion, to be behind closed door. Okay, because it is true that especially in certain topics, the way that you present the information and when you present the information is also part of those negotiations. So there are certain topics that maybe it is still necessary to have a closed door. So for me, as I said, it's a mix. I understand that this can be understood as a candy for certain political views, traditional ways of, we are not going to be challenged, we can send out their messages. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. And the clear example is the populist online. They are out of the public debate during this crisis because they have no solutions. They have nothing to offer. Because that's what they have been doing for years, basically sending out a statement, not caring about anything else. And so probably things will change, but not that much. I would love to see a big deal, a huge summit conclusions being signed totally digital. I think that we will have to wait for that. And the example is the summits that we're having. I mean, they need to see each other, to actually yell at each other, to tell them, the things to the face, and to get that feeling of passion. I mean, I cannot see the passion of a politician via screen. I can feel it. But I will always have the doubt if he's probably thinking about all the things, as Jane was saying, as Sophia was saying. So the point is that it has to be a mix, but it is a change of mentality, what this pandemic is bringing to us. So in the politicians. So that's it. That's probably my thoughts real quick. I hope that I haven't spent so much time, but I
think it was incredibly interesting. I also think that people will realize, and I honestly think people who are watching this will say, this is, you're speaking, very emotionally, you believe in it, and I think everybody feels that this is what you believe. This is the thing that, I think people have to realize, that you can get a lot of information from these conversations. And yeah, of course, you can also get it when you're networking at a conference with a drink, but I wouldn't just jump and say one is intrinsically better than the other. I also think, and you talked about the change of mentality, and I want to come back to you on that question. I think that with these tools, we can make things much more transparent. So you could have these meetings, instead of being exclusive to Brussels, exclusive to bureaucrats, exclusive to people who have access. You could say, well, okay, let's open this up and allow other people, at least people who are interested, to engage, to challenge the conversation. And I think it's incredibly difficult, because the default is to go back to the way things were. And people are deeply uncomfortable. Whenever people have power, they don't want to let it go. And in Brussels, the structure is you have a whole series of institutions that allow you to hold on to that power. And so it's really hard to change. People don't like change. Now, you talked about the importance of a change of mentality, which I think is a very, very good point. Now, I want to ask you the question. I mean, how far do you think the institution and the leadership of the institution, if you're able to openly reflect on that, is going towards that change? Are they? And it's not just a change towards digital, because we're saying we have tools, there are digital tools, so you have to use the tools. You have to then open up the conversation in a serious and very different way. And, you know, as you said, the pandemic is an incredibly unique historical moment when there's a desperate need for information. I mean, everybody is confused. You know, what's happening? Second wave, not second wave, mask, not mask. I mean, the information keeps coming and it's really hard to judge. Even if you're an expert, you have different opinions. So do you think the Commission is ready and able to make that transformation? Or do you think it's just gonna kind of stumble and just not really change? What's your view?
I think, I honestly believe that the Commission, it has the means, it has the power, it has the possibility to do so. And now, will they do it? It depends a lot on the people actually working there, and the not pressure, but the flow of ideas, the how you actually working in an institution can actually present to your hierarchy, to your bosses, say, hey, this is the way to go, and how passionate you can be to defend that idea. At the end of the day, I believe that from a communication point of view, and when talking about this transition or coming back to be real to the roots of social media, I believe that the meetings need to change. When you meet towards communication, regarding communication, any campaign, any strategy, whatever, the meeting shouldn't be what do we say. It should be which story we want to tell here. And then if the story is about solidarity, okay, stick to it. Take the messages that you want to highlight and put them out there, and make yourself available. I mean, honestly, I mean, the structure that the Commission has to make digital a reality, and as you said before, to make it also wider, to burst the Brussels bubble, the Commission has representation offices in every single member state. What they need is to put resources on them. The political leaders, the political masters of the Commission, they are sometimes asking the impossible to the people in the representations. That is to, you need to be in the media every day. You need to, okay. And then when a journalist asks for an interview for a commissioner, my God, it is really difficult to get it. So in times of crisis, especially, make yourself available. I hope to see it, but it depends a lot on the person, in the same way that different politicians, different commissioners are using in different ways social media, Vestager or Phil Hogan, they also engage in a different way. So it depends at the end of the day about themselves. And I hope that the push is coming also from the amazing professional communicators that the Commission has. And I hope that they are not getting, mute or silence or shy when presenting their ideas. When I was there, I was always telling the same. Let's present a bunch of crazy ideas. I don't care. Probably it's a no. In the 3 first ideas, it's going to be a no. Okay, maybe the 4th one pass. And if not, let's present it again next year. I mean, I remember we were implementing things that we presented in 2012. We were implementing them on social media in 2018. So it takes time, but of course, it's all depend on the political leadership. Personally, I found especially during the Juncker Commission, a political leadership that was eager to put resources, to put money, and to put, and to listen to the experts on social media on how to do things. And of course, I mean, this needs to be a balance. I mean, the Commission is representing, the image of the Commission cannot be put at stake, but the Commission cannot be seen either as a broadcaster online, let's say. So it is a mix between what you want and what the people are expecting. But again, it is so important to involve the journalists and the media in this. It is so important that if you don't, you are not going to get the attention that you want to get when needed, as in these times of crisis.
Thank you. That was extremely interesting. There are people from the Commission on this call, so I hope that they...
Why they are not working?
They're working all the time. They're just multitasking. So hopefully we'll get some of their comments. And of course, we're going to come back to that in a second. But first, Leo, I know that you had to move rooms because somebody was drilling, which is, again, the pleasures of live.
So loud, right next to my door, and I couldn't hear any of you guys, so I moved downstairs. So I apologize if that was visible or annoying to anyone, but I'm downstairs now, and I hope it's going to be okay. So I see a lot of comments. Thank you so much for responding. I also want to bring in Mark Watts to ask a question. He's been super engaging. Mark, are you with us? And if so, I think you have a lot of interesting things to say and a question for Pablo, or Pablos, as he appears here on my screen. Mark, are you with us? And if so, can you turn on your camera? And I also see, yes, you're there. Hi, Mark.
Hi, yes, I'm with you. First of all, thanks for ZN Consulting for running this amazing webinar. Congratulations to you all. Yeah, my question was to Pablo, who just spoke, I think, for many of us about the need for more authenticity and passion. But one of my concerns, I've been saying throughout this discussion, we need the best of both. We need the best of digital and video advocacy, of course. We need to move and we need to adapt and we need to change, but we need the best of the traditional as well. Because I think as someone who's been an MEP for 10 years and now in consultancy, the big thing missing in Brussels is the content and the quality of that content. So many people speak in abstract terms. So my question really for Pablo is, do we need more communication on the things that matter to real people who are struggling in the member states, in the regions, in the cities, in the rural areas? Things like inclusivity, things like solidarity, things like the recovery plan, things like resilience. We need a conversation around the issues that matter to real people. So yes, the way we convey those messages is incredibly important, and it has to become more digital in my view, but the content surely is what matters. We need to talk about things that matter to real people, not in abstract terms. What does Pablo perhaps have to say about that? In other words, less Euro bubble speak, more real speak.
I totally agree. And that has been the never-ending, let's say, conversation for years, how to communicate better. Because for me, I lose my patience when someone tells me, no, it's the media, that they don't talk about the A, B, or C. Let the media do their job. So let's tell the story in the way that it can contribute to what the media is. If we cannot set up the agenda, if the institution cannot set up the informative agenda, let's participate of what's been going on in the media world. But let's not tell the journalists or the media what to do. They know their job. So for me, I totally agree. I mean, the abstract term, and I don't want to be mean, but I'm going to say something that is that communications for years in the European Union has been managed by let's say not experts in communication, expert in law, in EU law, and I understand why, but you need expert in communication, because it's not everything about the law. Maybe it was some time ago. Even if the European Union is a union of law and everything is linked to the treaties, I understand that. But the way that you tell the story, it has to do a lot with, nowadays, with emotions. And especially during these times, the pandemic times, symbols were important. And we saw how the gap of information that happened at the beginning of the crisis, probably until March, when the institution reacted, and they reacted in a way I have never seen, and not only the huge package in terms of numbers, but also the speed, how they reacted, the strong messages coming from the parliament. it took a while. It took a while for that to react. And during that gap, we have seen how a picture of buses with the flag of China made the round all over, when there were teams of people, doctors from the Netherlands going to help out in Italy. When Italy was suffering, the feeling was that the EU was looking at the other side, and or not knowing what was at the stake. And what it was at stake is that people needed the commission or the institution to say, we're here, we are going to help, this is what we are doing, and to show them. So if the story is solidarity, tell it. But of course, when we start talking with the commission, when the institutions start talking about abstract terms, we are talking just for the bubble. Again, the multilingual aspect of it, that it was one of my obsessions when I was in the commission, it is so needed. I mean, I cannot understand. I cannot expect my grandmother to understand whatever I don't know, Margarita Skinas is saying in English. I need the commissioners, I need the representation to spread the message, to talk in the language of the people, not only in the way they speak, but also in their actual language. So for me, it is a matter of not just saying it. Okay, we are going to invest. In order to do things in a better, in a professional way, you need to invest. You need to put resources, human resources and economic resources in the digital area, and also to trust the professionals of communication when they suggest the way of telling a story.
Thank you very much, Pablo. So we are going to just do one poll, and then it's time for a bit of debating, because we have quite a few different viewpoints here. But I would just like to get your opinion for the people on the call. So I'd like to know how you communicate with journalists, if you communicate with journalists, of course, and if not, you just have to imagine it. So how do you communicate with journalists? And if you could just vote, if it's via phone, email, social media, or if you have no idea, you can just vote for I would love to know, because you have no idea how to communicate with journalists. We have two journalists on the panel, and not just journalists, but EU influencers. That means that they are also fantastic on Twitter and have been ranked as the most influential journalists in the EU bubble. Those are, of course, Pablo and James. So I don't know, and maybe they can tell us afterwards, after the debate, how they prefer to be communicated with. But I can now end the poll, and we can see that most people say that they communicate with these people over email and not social media. So those are the results of the poll. All right. So Phil, I think it is time for a bit of debating. And Phil, you're on mute. Phil, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. We're coming to the point where we're going to go back and put some of these questions to our panelists for what we like to call the debate. And I hope people appreciate the amazing sound effects from our team. Thank you. You see, we're bringing life to these webinars. So what we'd like to do is to go back to some of the questions we had during the conversation and basically try to answer them as effectively as possible. We were talking about journalists. Well, they like the crowd here reaches out by email. James, tell them why they should use the phone. Or well, two things I would ask, maybe, what should they do to reach you and to reach journalists? And secondly, do you have any comments on, what Pablo and Sophia said in general, some things that you'd like to jump on?
Oh yeah, I mean, on the communicating with journalists, I mean, a lot of journalists will tell you to send them an email. Depending on who you are, I would probably say that as well. The neat thing about an email is it's extremely, extremely easy to ignore. One of the most irritating things about being a journalist is calling someone up, and then after you finish speaking to the communications professional, they say, can you put that in an email? So why didn't you just have a pencil, like I don't know, a professional? Anyway, that's an ongoing bugbear of mine. So yeah, I mean, I'd say email, but if you actually want to get an answer to whatever it is that you're having to contact a journalist about, the best thing is the phone, because once you're on the phone, there is no escape, and you are straitjacketed by the rules of polite social interaction. So that is why I always call people, because it's just harder to ignore. Yeah, a couple of things I was thinking about when Sophia and Pablo were talking. I mean, I think one of the sad things really about Twitter and social media is the amount of people who don't have a sense of humor on it. I think there are a lot of people who do, and then that's really where I think Twitter's at its best, when it's kind of playful and fun, even sort of ephemeral and disposable. I don't think we need something which is going to last forever on social media. I mean, things I remember, I don't know, DG Trade have done quite a lot of good stuff, showing GIFs of lobsters and all of that stuff. It's a very sort of simple, fun idea. It makes you smile, but you kind of remember what it was about as well. So I think, there's a value to playfulness, which I think in Brussels, which sometimes veers towards the pompous, people don't feel comfortable with. I think something else we should possibly point out is that the shift to digital is going to be used as an excuse for massive cost cutting by some businesses, by some consultancies. It'll be used to cut staff, cut communication staff, cut policy staff, because, well, that's what management's like. So, the idea that there's this wonderful digital future ahead of us, well, that hasn't been the case for a lot of disrupted industries. And yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. So I think so humor and cost cutting. I think the 2 points I'm taking away from your
humor, and everyone's going to end up on the scrap heap. So
very optimistic view. So yeah. Maybe just moving, because we're in this journalist discussion. Pablo, what should people do, and maybe some advice for people listening here to reach out to people? We heard James talking about email, talking also about the phone. Now the phone is obviously great if you have the number and if you can get through. I think actually there's the conversation that you can have on a direct message on Twitter and on Twitter itself, which is of course a completely different kind of conversation. But first I'd like to get your reaction to humor. Do you think that could solve all our problems?
Yes. I mean, there's something about humor, okay, that is different. It's different. Every single person identifies or take humor in a different way. For me, humor is free, and there is probably not that many topics, let's say, that stay out of the humor zone. It should be the role of an institution to do humor online. Well, sometimes there are opportunities. At the end of the day, you will have the chance to, well, take a pun or make some jokes. There are certain actors that probably political actor that could have much more opportunities than the institutional account, especially in times of crisis when people are suffering, because you need to take into account so many things that are going around, but not because, oh, I'm going to offend A or B, but because the situation is what it is, and the impression, the feeling that you want to create online, the voice you have, and the trust that you want to give to the citizens, leaves short, let's say, or little space for humor. But for me, humor is probably the most powerful tool that one can use, especially when the attention of the media or the attention of the social media sphere is so much needed as it is the case of the EU.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think Donald Tusk was a master at this, but James, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the sort of problems as well with humor is that there's, you know, always a risk of causing offense. Now, for me, you know, I've obviously sort of been inured by 4 years of Brexit. I almost don't feel anything at all, let alone empathy or care for other human beings. So, you know, I don't mind really if I offend anyone, you know, provided I don't do anything too mad. I probably won't get sacked, probably. I mean, never say never. But you know, I appreciate that for people like Pablo, people like Sophia, you know, you're going to have people who are a lot more worried about that sort of stuff and are a lot more kind of stick in the mud about it. So, you know, I have a kind of freedom, you know, to basically, if I'd either just ignore people who get upset or just say, well, don't follow me. I'm not sure you'd be able to get away with that if that's Coca-Cola. I don't know.
That's a very good point. I think it's basically obviously the you know, the difficulty if you're representing either an institution or a company, which is of course you're not just expressing your opinions, but you're expressing.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, Philip, but it's also whether you think that social media is something with sort of any more sort of greater importance or value than just a passing moment. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with passing moments. I mean, you know, great poems have been written about passing moments. And, you know, there's a beauty to its temporariness. But, you know, that's...
Well, I think that's the business model of Snapchat and the idea of things disappearing. At least that was a major pull going in. And I think that's what a lot of teenagers really like about the platform. Now, I want to move to Sophia just to react maybe to the, you know, the humor and culture and maybe the difficulty of telling a real story in this new platform. You know, how do you think how do you get it right? And then I want to come back to Pablo about, you know, your advice to people about reaching out, commission and journalists. Sophia?
Yes, so I really like the advice on humor, and I have seen both James and Pablo's tweets before joining, and indeed I really appreciate it. And you know, your ordeal with Brexit reminds me of our ordeal with the Greek crisis, and you know, at some point you just can't have more.
It's been an ordeal. It's been great.
Sorry?
Not an ordeal. It's been great. It's been really fun.
Depends. We all learn from it. Now, from a corporate perspective is different. So yes, from a corporate perspective, I would like to add more humor to our Twitter account for the team, the EU Affairs team, and let's work on that because it's not always intuitive, right? It needs to go through a lot of process. I guess the same with institutions sometimes. But the brands, no, you have the corporate, you have the EU Affairs team, but you also have the brands, and some brands stand indeed for playfulness, and this is where you have it more, and it is easier because it's part of the identity. And I mean, if you are looking for like, I sometimes I'm jealous of the corporate tweets of innocent drinks. We are part of it's part of Coca-Cola, but they are fun. I enjoy, and sometimes I look at it and say, damn, why can't we be like them? Now, there are checks and balances. There has to be some sense of principles, right? So it's different if I tweet, and sometimes even if I tweet, it's perceived as Coca-Cola tweeting. So you need to be more careful. And we have the rules of the principles, right, of engaging on social media as a company, and this is what is being revised right now, and the policies. So it's more complicated, as some would put it on social media. So Philip, I think we can get it right and enjoy the ephemeral nature and enjoy the more lasting, you know, because for the corporates, you also try to build a legacy. You try to build your profile, you try to build who you are, because people assume who you are or want to believe who you are, but it's not what you're working on, it's not what you stand for. And this is also a space where you can express that. This is a comment I would like to make on what Pablo said about, speak with real words if you're politicians. The same applies for companies as well. And on public affairs now, especially because it is digital, that this helped a lot to accelerate that, is you don't speak only to the EU bubble. You speak to a wider audience that will meet you online. Of course, you have the stakeholders that you're engaging more, but inevitably the public affairs campaigns, and we've seen that already at Coca-Cola, you speak to a wider audience. And it's about having one language inside, outside, and with simple language that people feel related to. So I really like that point from Pablo.
Fantastic, thank you. So I just want to ask Pablo for kind of a closing comment before we continue this conversation on social media. And Leora is going to highlight a few ways of doing that. So Pablo, what's your advice in reaching both journalists and institutions, and your final thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this part that social media is a place where basically chimpanzees live together with experts and journalists and snitches. That they are always trying to look at your tweets and say, oh, he's speaking on behalf of the commission, or she's speaking on behalf of Coca-Cola. Let's send 150 emails to their bosses. Let's tag them online and let's try to get him or her sacked. That is happening online. That's something, and I understand why certain people, they say, okay, I'm going to be careful with social media. Nevertheless, and how to contact the institution, I believe that is all about, do not be shy. Actually, if you see an official, if you see someone online that you, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, that you want to contact, because as a journalist or as a public institution, you believe that he can actually add some kind of value to whatever you are writing about or working on, just do it. And of course, for me, I mean, if you have the option to send an email or send a direct message on Twitter, it is always going to be a little bit more personal than to directly put a tweet, because maybe the tweet gets missed and you don't see it, whatever. A direct message, an email, and then ask for the phone and give a call or a video call these days. If you can go for a beer to have a quick coffee, that's even perfect. I mean, I always have tried to actually move from this offline wall to the online wall, to the offline wall, to the real wall. So to discuss, to talk things around a coffee, it's always more real, and I believe that is still better.
Excellent. So Leo, you wanted to point out something on Twitter about the conversation?
So a lot of comments that people in the chat are also making is that it's all about the quality of the numbers, and also what do engagement and numbers really mean. So of course, before, when everything was offline, there were a lot of policy papers that were shared, really long documents, and it was questionable how much those were really being read. Now, with a lot of the information online, there is a lot of depth in the information. You can, there are GIFs and there are infographics, and when you go, there's a lot of information on websites. So online information is not just Snapchat information that disappears. There's information from Twitter to websites, and on those websites you have a lot of depth of the information that stays there, and where policymakers, MEPs, journalists can find the information that they need. And if that's done well, people are pointing out on the chat, that is actually very valuable and probably more useful than those long policy papers that were really time consuming to read. And so also a lot of questions about what, you know, in the terms of numbers, how do we know if the right people are seeing it? And so I think maybe we can devote another conversation more about those types of things. It seems that there's a bit of interest in that. If you want to continue the conversation, we would love for you to do so using the hashtag Hyperchat, tagging us, of course, tagging all the speakers. We will definitely be continue to talk about these types of subjects. And I don't know if you want to show any more slides, Phil, but we are very thankful for all the speakers to have joined us today. I think it was extremely interesting, thought-provoking, and I am also very thankful that all the participants shared their thoughts, and we will definitely be reading. And if you are sharing them on Twitter or Instagram as well, we're on Instagram or LinkedIn, we can continue the conversation. So thank you very much for that.
So I think it was a fantastic discussion from the panelists, from the crowd. You've been great. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing. Please continue to do this online and prove to James that you can be social on social media. And I'd like to close by asking you to join me virtually and really with a round of applause for our amazing speakers. Whoa, my round of applause is not getting the amazing noises. So we'll give a round of applause like this, and our amazing tech is always full of surprises so that we can have an unpredictable moment. So I hope you have a fantastic time. Thank you everyone who joined. See you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok if you want. All right, have a fantastic day. See you online.
Thank you, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The sound's not there.
I know. It's just,
Oh, there it is.
no, you're still there. And digital. What the hell? I hope you can feel the love coming through. It's so real.
It's weird. Not when you speak.
There you go. We have a satisfactory ending. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you. And don't forget to tweet.
See you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
It was great.